The universal economy is based on intake and output. Throughout the eternal career, you will never encounter monotony of inaction or stagnation of personality. Progress is made possible by inherent motion. Achievement grows out of the divine capacity for action, and achievement is the child of imaginative adventure. But inherent in this capacity for achievement is the responsibility of ethics, the necessity for recognizing that the world and the universe are filled with a multitude of differing types of beings. All of this magnificent creation, including yourself, was not made just for you. This is not an egocentric universe. The gods have decreed it is more blessed to give than to receive. And Jesus put it, it makes you happier to give than to receive. And said your master, son, he who would be greatest among you, let him be server of all. I think this, if we would study Jesus' admonition to the Roman senator concerning wealth, we would get a peculiar kind of ethical yardstick wherewith to measure our own endowments. Jesus' admonition to the Roman is not capitalistic, socialistic, communistic, utopian, or anything else. It's one of the most original pronouncements on economics I've ever read in my life. Do you recall it? It has to do with degrees of ownership. And it's an amazing statement. And I think it helps. Jesus breaks wealth down into 10 kinds. Inherited, discovered, trade, unfair, interest, genius, accidental, stolen, trusts, and earned. 1462. And in this section, he goes on to point out the degrees of ownership which attach to these different kinds of wealth, pointing out a principle. Number one, if it's unfair, get rid of it. Make restitution. This leaves you with fair wealth, honorable wealth. And then he points out that your right to have a say in what is done with this is in direct proportion to the effort which you expended in the acquisition. The more you have personally done about this, the more you have to say about this. The less you've done, the more your ownership impinges on trusteeship. This,
Fair. So very fair.
Sure. This thing is proportional. Peter never told the Alphaeus twins up on the Sea of Galilee near the end of his Morantia career on earth. He never told the Alphaeus twins, now, boys, go out and preach to the multitudes. He sent them back to the fish nets. But to Peter he said, Peter, be a good shepherd, feed my sheep. Jesus had made an investment in Simon Peter, and he wanted that investment to pay out. Somewhere in the papers it makes the statement, what is loyalty? It is nothing but a feeling of fairness. How could you take so much and give nothing? These gifts which we've received from God, we didn't earn. It was a free will gift from God. We can be proud that he thought enough of us to make us these gifts. But the receipt of these gifts should create in us a feeling, first of affection for him in return, and second of obligation. The greater the gift to the person, be it the thought adjuster from Divinington or just plain downright natural human aptitudes, the greater the gift, the greater the obligation to that person. The steward that got, the vice president that got $5 million was held accountable for what he could earn on $5 million. The VP that got $2 million was only accountable for what he could earn with $2 million. Somehow that means more to me when I talk about vice presidents and millions and stewards and talent. I look at it this way: if a human being has something, then he owes something. He owes something to the world in which he lives. This feeling of morality, you can get this right down on the human level. Consider the inheritance of an American. It's a very rich inheritance. We have reaped where we have not sown. We live in an imperfect society, yet one which demands that children be educated. If my parents had not believed in education, society would have guaranteed me a minimum literacy. They would have guaranteed me enough so that if I was really hungry, I, on my own initiative, could have gone and fought for more. We live in a society which theorizes, at least, equality of justice. That's good, even though we don't have it here. But at least we're striving for this. We live in a society which says we shall have the right to freedom of speech and freedom of worship. None of these things did we personally earn. All of these things represent an unearned inheritance. And again I say, how could we take so much and give nothing? Looking back, who made this possible? Well, a few big guys, but an awful lot of cooperating little people like us. It took a lot of support from small people for big people to make these advances. And again, let's pay out the investment. I have a feeling of moral responsibility to the society and to the imperfect civilization of which I'm a member. Again, how could we take so much and give nothing? How can you balance pride and courage? How can you balance altruism and egoism? You need a balance. Again, if you're completely non-egoistic, you've got 4 flat tires. You're of no use to anyone. And if you've got a great big overdeveloped ego, your tires are going to blow, and you're not much use to anyone either. How can you walk between, well, going back to Jesus, in that wonderful section on the acme of religious living in part 3, they use such words as this: his faith was childlike, but not childish. There's a world of difference. He depended on God, but never presumed on God. In other words, he did the things which he should do, and trust that God would do the things which God should do and which he couldn't do. He had courage, but he was never audacious. He was warm-hearted, but not sentimental. He was stable, but not prosaic. How can we arrive at a balanced life? This is the only resolution, I think, of the human paradox. And again, they admire Jesus in these papers, not so much because he was one thing or another thing, but because of the exquisite symmetry of the balance of his character. He was generous, but not foolish. He was frugal, but not miserly. He was cautious, but never cowardly. This is something we each have to work out. I'm very proud that I can call myself a son of God, a human son of God. I'm very proud of the future which spreads out before me. But I also feel very humble because I didn't earn a damn bit of it. I can take credit only for how I use these talents. If I have any brains, I can't take credit for the brains. I was born with them. The genes were good to me. Neither can I be critical of someone who, well, as one superintendent put it, he says, "You mean my foreman here was out for a short beer when the Almighty passed out intelligence?" I said, "Check. That's right." He isn't to blame. The Alpheus twins did the best they could. This to me is the resolution of the human paradox. Can you receive? Gladly. And having received gladly, can you give generously? There's a cycle here. The more you get, the more you give. The more you have, the more is expected of you. Of the teacher, more is expected than of the pupil. And of the master, more than the servant. When we are tempted to magnify our self-importance, if we stop to contemplate the infinity of the greatness and grandeur of our makers, our own self-glorification becomes sublimely ridiculous, even verging on the humorous. One of the functions of humor is to help all of us take ourselves less seriously. Humor is the divine antidote for exaltation of ego. I think one of the most rueful sessions of laughter I ever had in my life was in connection with a trip out to California. I had seen this group, and I had a very rugged weekend following out on San Pablo Bay with a couple of crazy Marine buddies of mine who run a newspaper down there. And this was a very, very lost weekend. And coming back on the Super Chief, I barely made the train. I tumbled into bed because I'd done everything except sleep. The next morning I get up and I looked in the mirror, and the events of the weekend were writ in bold hand on my face. My eyes looked like a couple of bloody oysters floating in a bowl of skim milk. And the whiskers looked singularly unattractive. And I had a generally washed out expression, you know. It kind of like, I looked like a fellow that should go to school for many years to work up to the level of an Alpheus twin. And I got to laughing. And I thought, Willie, here you are trying to be St. Polycarp for the Blue Book movement. And if this is what our unseen friends has got to work with, God only knows they are real hard up now. They're hard up. I never felt so humorously humble in my whole blasted life. I've never forgotten that incident. And I had a feeling of tremendous compassion for these people that I can't see, which I'm sure produced this book. Geez, they're hard up. They're desperate. They're out recruiting like we did during the war, you know. Well, is the body warm? Can he speak? Hire him, you know. And I think this, I can tell you this much about psychometric testing. This is not always true, but quite often, a person who is a real religious fanatic has an extremely high score in the religious motivation, and he just plain flunks our crude test of humor. He takes humor from the social intelligence test. You know, Moss? It isn't a very good test, but Lord, it's the only one in existence. You see, he takes God seriously, and that's wonderful, but then he takes himself seriously, and that's horrible. And I can just see him. Let's turn the clock back 500 years. Let's see, that would make this 1459. That does it. I can just see me standing up, you know, and the faggots are piled around my shins, and this guy with this thin-lipped smile is saying, Sadler, for the good of your soul, as he lights the tinder, you know. And I don't want to be a martyr. I'm willing to be, but they're going to have to catch me first. These things, to me, are how to resolve this human paradox. Example. You try this sometime. Go out when the sky is pretty clear at night. When you can see, well, I always think of that cartoon, that wonderful cartoon in old Life magazine. It's in an alley, on the Lower East Side of New York, and this is long before they begun to put in modern housing. And there are two little kids standing in the alley, and there's washing hung out everywhere. They're looking up at the night sky, and the little boy is holding the hand of the little girl, and he's saying to her, "Gee," says, "look at the stars, as thick as bedbugs." So go on out some night when the stars are as thick as bedbugs, and start thinking about how big these are. Consider the light years of distance. Consider that every one of those little specks, with the exception of the planets, is a star, and most of them are much bigger than our sun. Consider the vast distances that you're looking at. Consider how many planets there are, with how many people on them, each one of them with egos, each one of them with paradoxes to resolve, each one of them with a thought adjuster, personality, and the spirit of truth, and all the equipment that glitters so. Consider how little of the universe you're looking at. Consider how much more of the universe there is that you can't see. Just like this, it goes on and on and on. Consider that it's 500,000 light years from here into Uversa, which means it must be another 500,000 from Uversa in to the outer margins of Havona. Consider all that you can consider. Double it, cube it, take it to the 4th power. And then stop and think that all this tremendous picture which you're trying to build up in your mind is nothing but the least pinpoint of a revelation of an infinite God. And as you contemplate this, you'll start shrinking. You can't take this very long. Get inside quick before you disappear. You keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller and less significant. You follow me? Get in under the roof where you can feel normal sized again. Because I think you could completely vanish if you kept the process up long enough. This is good for the ego too. Here you are strutting around on a ball of mud, a little midge, squeaking in a tiny voice, "I am important, I am important, I am important, I am important." The human paradox, I think, is a matter of being sane. And sanity is defined in here as an orderly arrangement of mental systems. In other words, if you've got the adjuster operating as a controlling nucleus in your life vehicle, you're going to be fairly sane because you've got a stable atom there. You can swing your ego around the adjuster as an orbital electron, but you cannot swing the adjuster around your ego as a human nucleus. The masses are too disproportionate. If you try to... Question?
Pardon me, you have said that we are all a little insane, and I think we all agree. Does this book also agree that we are all a little insane?
No, that's my own idea.
So does the...
Even as Paul, some things I teach by commandment and others by permission. You shall not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the grain. No, I think we're all a bit insane. We don't really think. I think Jesus was sane, completely sane. I don't think anybody else has achieved that level of sanity. In other words, Jesus saw clearly. Jesus saw where values were. He was utterly sane. Now, I think we achieve relative degrees of sanity, which means we're relatively unsane. Because if we're less than totally sane, we're partly unsane. Real sanity means, in part, less rationalization. Rationalization is nothing but lying to yourself or finding good reasons for doing bad things. You know, it's an internal snow job. It means less projection. That is to say, a more honest criticism of one's own faults and less of criticizing of those faults when discovered in other people.
How can one be honest with themselves totally?
They can't. It's an ideal. I'm describing an ideal here. I don't think any of us can attain it. But that doesn't mean we can't strive for it. And here again, I think is where humor comes in. Just about the time you think you're real sane, and maybe you should have an ST in front of your name, take a look in the looking glass and have a good laugh and get your feet back on the earth again. You know what I mean? Humor, along with prayer and worship, are the tools of sanity. I think is an awfully good statement. Just above the human paradox, on page 1221, they say this choosing of the Father's will is the spiritual finding of the Spirit Father by mortal man, even though an age must pass before the creature son may actually stand in the factual presence of God on paradise. This choosing does not so much consist in the negation of creature will, not my will but yours be done, as it consists in the creature's positive affirmation, it is my will that your will be done. It seems to me that a lot of this creature paradox, this human paradox, can be resolved if you are pretty certain about God. If you're sure about God and you're sure about His love, and if you've got enough maturity to not presume on Him, just trust Him. I think in the child-father relationship, you have your best cure for this human paradox. You know you're a creature. You're of a different order of being. You're not His equal. You're merely made partly in His image. And you keep things in proportion that way. We can't. A mammal and a thought adjuster have nothing in common. And that man is caught in the middle because human nature impinges on both mammalian nature and the indwelling spirit indirectly. But again, so we're mammals. So we have a spiritual potential. I don't know, it seems to me that people tend to move in one of two directions. Either they sort of give up on the spiritual side and just enjoy being mammalian. And I'm afraid a lot of people are simply responding to the simple mammalian urge to live. Or they get real persnickety on the other side and sort of in the fashion of, who was it founded the Methodist Church? Wesley? Wesley. Yeah, they attempt sainthood in this life. And I think in attempting sainthood in this life, you're going to warp like a pretzel. I mean, I just think you wind up as some sort of a monster. Because you're trying to be a frog, and you're not a frog, you're a tadpole. And I'm a little bit thick, but I don't quite see why all of this noise and shouting about this. Because I feel cheerful about being a mammal, I feel hopeful about being a phenoliger, and I know I'm in the middle. And both ends are playing me in the middle, and I laugh about it, and I can't get too excited about this. I do not personally see this problem in my own life. Maybe I'm blind. I know I'm a mammal. Comparative anatomy has convinced me of this. I did some dissection once upon a time. And I feel a kinship with God. And the paradox to me is divinely humorous. It's funny. It's not tragic. It's just plain darn funny. I can chuckle at this paradox.
It's also fascinating, though.
Yes, it is.
Well, I think it's thrilling.
I mean, there is so much. I see this in myself and I see it in my fellow men. There is so much that's great and grand and noble in humanity, and so much that's just plain damn foolishness. I think some people set up standards which are unrealistic. And I think people confuse mores with morals. A student of history, even a casual student of history, is bound to develop a certain sophistication in his attitude toward mores, or the customs of whatever tribe in which one chances to live. I happen to live in a Midwestern American tribe. We have our mores. And the different times and places provide different standards of conduct. And feelings of guilt arise psychologically through a transgression of the mores. And this does not necessarily mean the guilt that attaches to sin, which the paper specifically define as conscious disloyalty to deity. But you feel uneasy if you run counter to the mores of your time and place, if you believe in these mores. I'm not so concerned about the, quote, lusts of the flesh, unquote. And the word lust meant something quite different when it was used in the translation. It meant desire. You know what I mean? I just think people set up standards that are unrealistic and then fail. They take an ideal and presume that it's an idea when it's not. An idea is a validated plan for action. You can execute an idea. An ideal is something, yet again, it cannot be executed until it has been translated and promoted to the level of an idea. Up until that time, it's merely a dream about a plan for action. It's something which may stimulate conduct, but it cannot guide conduct. And I think if we will get our ideals to the level of ideas, then these we can execute. You cannot execute an ideal exactly. You can attempt it, but you're going to fail. And this, I think, is where we say, well, gee, we're falling down. Mea culpa, bring on the sackcloth and ashes. I don't think this is realistic living. Here, I think there is a possibility of developing from this blue book a religion the like of which this world has never yet seen. A religion that's full of good humor. A religion which is full of the joy of existence. A religion which is totally devoid of fear on the theological or spiritual nature. A religion which people wear casually and yet earnestly. A religion which is gracious in its tolerance, in its leashed strength. A religion which has nothing to do with any one day of a week. A religion which pervades the whole of a human life, 24 hours a day. A religion which is dealt with in a familiar, friendly way. A religion which is a part of a human being. A religion which is inseparable from philosophy, from ethics, from morality, from economics, from political thinking and everything else. A religion which seeps down through all the levels of a human personality until it becomes indistinguishable from the whole social fragrance of that human being. This to me is religion which appeals. And this to me is a religion which you don't find very much of in human history. You remember in this government on a neighboring planet, they don't have any churches at all. Here's a world that's evolved to the point where it's ahead of us, at least socially, economically, and politically. No church has yet appeared in that society. That intrigues me. That intrigues me. What do you think about this idea of religion? This is a religion which you're good-natured about. This is a religion where you don't pick it up gingerly, you know. You breathe it like you breathe air. You drink it like you drink water. It's a normal part of living. It's real. It's not something that's dissociated, compartmentalized, or set off. It's something which it's so much a part of your life that you're casual with it. It's a familiar thing. You're casual with it like you're casual with clothing that's well broken in, an old suit of tweeds. It's a friendly, familiar, warm thing. It's nothing which you feel either ashamed of or heroic about. It's something which you just are. Here's the thought about religion. Can we have religion without a priesthood?
Yes.
I think I am about one of the most unbishop-like persons ever to become connected with a religious movement. I am absolutely a layman. Anything other than that thought is repulsive to me. Can we have a thing like this without having priests and ministers? Jesus started out with a bunch of fishermen.
He was a layman.
He was a layman. And there wasn't a single one of the apostles was a graduate of a theological seminary. Is it possible that we could do this with the Blue Book business? Or if we got to have something, could we at least be as wise as they were in the Commonwealth of Israel when they required that each rabbi learn a trade? Paul was a tent maker by profession. At least this keeps the rabbi in touch with reality, you know? The few ministers I've met that really appeal to me, well, more than half of them had this quality. They entered the ministry late in life after having been very successful businessmen. And there was something very real about these guys. I met an Episcopalian priest in Hudson, Ohio, who had been a wingding of an insurance agent and entered the ministry at age 40. I met him when he was 50. Gee, the guy talked real, you know? What do you say we have a little full-dress discussion on personality and see a bit about what the book says about it? Let's start out with page 1225. Somewhere in these papers it says that personality is one of the unsolved mysteries of the universe of universes. So I think appropriately they say it would be presumptuous to attempt the definition of personality. But still we can describe what personality does. You can tell what we know about it. I looked up personality in Webster. It's defined as the quality or state of being personal. It's a beautiful definition, isn't it? It starts out by saying, personality is that quality in reality which is bestowed by the Universal Father himself or by the conjoined actor acting for the Father. Well, let's explore now and see what that means. Let's look over on page 106. Just below the middle of the page it says, the Father bestows personality by his personal free will. Why he does so, we can only conjecture. How he does so, we do not know. Neither do we know why the third source bestows non-Father personality. But this the infinite Spirit does in his own behalf, in creative conjunction with the Eternal Son, and in numerous ways unknown to you. The infinite Spirit can also act for the Father in the bestowal of first source personality. So that a being who is in the Father's personality circuit may have received this personality by the act of the Universal Father, or he may have received this personality by the act of the infinite Spirit acting as attorney in fact for the Universal Father. That's what that statement means. Now let's take a little excursion. We hit something in here that's intriguing. There are two kinds of personalities. If it is a Father-bestowed personality, it's called first source personality. But there are third source personalities. Beings who have free will, but are not in the Father's personality circuit. You see, the infinite Spirit can not only draw sight drafts on the Father's account, but he can issue checks in his own name and right. And then these are third source personalities. And they're defined in here. They have subjective self-consciousness, but they do not objectively respond to the Father's personality circuit.
Are you on 103?
Yeah, 106.
106, yeah.
They may not be unqualifiedly personal to creature beings, but they are contactable. All personality is contactable. There are numerous types of third source personalities. The Infinite Spirit bestows third source personality upon numerous groups who are not included in the Father's personality circuit, such as certain of the power directors. I'm sure that I'm sure these power centers are volitionally intelligent beings. I know that the associate power directors are personal beings in the third source sense. Now below that level, I don't think they have free will in the third source sense. So, our first statement here, personality is that quality in reality which is bestowed by the Universal Father himself or by the conjoint actor acting for the Father. This discussion has to do with first source personality. They're ignoring third source personality because they're talking about us. 2. It may be bestowed upon any living energy system which includes mind or spirit. Now let's think about that. The use of the word or means it could be bestowed upon a living energy system which was wholly non-spiritual. Well, let's see what the papers say about that. In the second full paragraph on page 334, it says, "We may, however, state that there are no personalities of pure mind. No entity has personality unless he is endowed with it by God who is spirit. Any mind entity that is not associated with either spiritual or physical energy is not a personality." That's either or. And then down at the bottom of the page, certain other unrevealed creatures are what might be termed mindal and physical energy personalities. This type of being is non-responsive to spirit gravity, but is nonetheless a true personality. It is within the Father's circuit. We know nothing of such beings. These beings could be moral beings because morality is an attribute of personality. So we can say, item 2 means you could have a being whose constituent components were physical and mindal. That could be a personal being. You could have a being whose constituents were physical, mindal, and spiritual, as us, who could be a personal being. You could have a being consisting of an association of mind and spirit in varying percentages. Some more mindal with spirit, others more spiritual with mind, and these could be personal. Or you could have a being who was wholly spiritual, and this could be a personal being. Can we think of any being who is wholly spiritual and who is a personality? Yes, the Eternal Son. Stop and think. Neither the Father nor the Son have mind, because there is no mind until you get to the third source and center. No being antecedent to the third source and center is minded. It has mind as we understand mind. We'll come to this in a second.
Bill, can
Yes.
I interrupt you a second? The Father does not have mind.
Yes.
On page 365, there's a statement that says there is in the mind of God.
They're using that figuratively.
Just using it figuratively.
Yes.
Okay.
A thought adjuster doesn't have mind,
No,
but a
but
thought
it is
adjuster is
mind.
minded. We'll come to this in just a minute. 3. Personality is not wholly subject to the fetters of antecedent causation. It is relatively creative or co-creative.
And co-creative is so marvelous, I think.
Yes, with the adjuster.
I mean, the soul.
In other words, here is a series, and the mathematical prediction of the outworking of this series of events is computable. But when you inject a personality into this picture, you inject a random element, and the result is not strictly computable. On page 70, it's what I was looking for. Personality is one of the unsolved mysteries of the universe of universes. We are able to form adequate concepts of the factors entering into the makeup of various orders and levels of personality, but we do not fully comprehend the real nature of the personality itself. Yes. Capacity for divine personality is inherent in the pre-personal adjuster. Capacity for human personality is potential in the cosmic mind endowment of the human being. But the experiential personality of mortal man is not observable as an active and functional reality until after the material life vehicle of the mortal creature has been touched by the liberating divinity of the Universal Father, being thus launched upon the seas of experience as a self-conscious and a relatively self-determinative and self-creative personality. The material self is truly and unqualifiedly personal. It's that creativity that constitutes free will. Because out of this series of events, a personality may, at any decision juncture, create something that is not wholly predictable by antecedent causation. He may react in some new way, some non-predictable way, or some only partially predictable way. Determinism is in the keyboard of the piano. The free will is exhibited when the musician, with those keys, produces the melodies which come from somewhere. That's creativity, and that's free will. The musician cannot transcend the keyboard, but within the limits of that keyboard, what can't he do? We have 26 letters in the alphabet, and consider what William Shakespeare did with those 26 letters. That's creativity, and creativity, in the very word creativity, implies freedom of action, some degree of freedom from antecedent causation.
Within the limits of.
Yes, right. Our good friend had only 7 colors in the chromatic scale to work with and what he could see. But there's creativity in that picture. Within the limits of the canvas and the color, he had freedom to record his impression. And no two artists would make the same recording. But 2 cameras, 2 color cameras, would take identical photographs. And there's the difference. Bud and I could set up 2 color cameras, take that picture, and the difference would be predictable in the nature of the camera and the nature of the film. But if he and I could both paint, we'd sit down and we'd come out with 2 different pictures. And there's the difference. The camera has no freedom of choice.